If you're joining me for the first time, welcome. I'm Rynd, and this is the 1001 Business Problems Solved with Microsoft Teams podcast, short, practical episodes for leaders who want clarity without friction. And if you listened to the last episode, here's the quick recap. We talked about why leaders end up chasing updates. Not because they're bad leaders, and not because people aren't working. The work is happening. The problem is that information is scattered, so leaders have to ask, interrupt, and reconstruct reality before they can decide what to do next. In this episode, I want to take that one step further. Because once leaders hear that framing, the most common response is fine. I'll just ask better questions. I'll get better at prompting Copilot. That sounds reasonable. It's also where most people go wrong. Copilot doesn't get better because you get clever with prompts. Copilot gets better when your organization gets clearer. Here's what I mean by that. Copilot can only work with what your organization actually writes down. Not what people know in their heads. Not what was said in a hallway. Not what someone meant to update later. What's written down, shared, and visible. If work lives in inboxes, side chats, personal notes, and half-updated spreadsheets, Copilot has nothing solid to stand on. It will still answer you, but those answers will feel vague, incomplete, a little bit hand-wavy. And that's when leaders stop trusting it. Let me give you a quick example. We worked with the owner of a good-sized business who told us he spent the first hour of every morning just trying to get oriented. He checked email. He skimmed texts. He walked the floor. He asked a few people what changed the previous day. By the time he felt confident enough to make a decision, he was already behind. Nothing was wrong with his team. The problem was where the work lived. Conversations were in emails and private messages. Files were scattered across desktops. Updates lived in people's heads. We didn't add more meetings. We didn't add more reports. We simply moved the work into the open. Conversations went into Teams channels instead of side chats. Documents lived in a single SharePoint library instead of 5 versions floating around. Status updates were captured in a shared list so everyone could see what was real. A few weeks later, he told me something interesting. He said, "I don't feel smarter. I just don't feel lost anymore." That's what structure does. That wasn't a Copilot problem he solved. That was a structure problem. Now, when I say structure, I don't mean bureaucracy. I don't mean more process, more forms, or more red tape. I mean simple, adult habits about where work lives. Teams as the place where work conversations actually happen, not just meetings, but the day-to-day back and forth that explains why decisions were made. Channels inside of Teams that tell an ongoing story, instead of 1,000 disconnected messages scattered across private chats and email threads. SharePoint libraries that hold the current single version of the work, not 5 copies of the same file with someone's initials or a version number on the end. Lists and planners where updates and commitments are explicit instead of implied, and ownership is clear instead of assumed. When organizations do this well, something important changes. The work becomes legible. A leader can scroll back through a channel and see how a problem evolved. They can open a document library and know they're clicking on the latest version. They can look at a list and understand what's stuck, what's moving, and who owns the next step. And when that happens, Copilot stops sounding like a search tool. It starts sounding competent. Not because it's smarter, because it can finally see. This is where we see a lot of organizations miss the opportunity. They want Copilot to be their smartest employee, but they've given it the equivalent of a messy desk, unlabeled folders, and conversations happening in hallways it can't enter. In that environment, Copilot does exactly what you'd expect. It guesses. Sometimes it guesses well. Sometimes it doesn't. And leaders walk away thinking the tool is unreliable. But when organizations take the time to get their information in order, when Teams becomes the system of record for conversations and organizational memory, and when commitments are captured where everyone can see them, Copilot starts behaving very differently. It can connect dots across conversations. It can summarize what actually changed. It can surface patterns leaders didn't have time to notice. That's why we spend so much time helping organizations get their information structured properly. Not because structure is exciting, but because it's foundational. Copilot can only be as useful as the clarity you give it to work with. And here's the quiet benefit leaders feel when this starts working. Meetings stop being about figuring out what's real. Questions get sharper. Decisions happen sooner. Not because leaders are rushing, but because they're no longer guessing. In the next episode, I want to talk about what this actually changes for leaders day to day. How meetings feel different. How surprises show up earlier. And how leadership gets lighter when orientation stops eating up your attention. Until then, I want you to picture a workday where you spend far less time chasing updates and far more time making clear, grounded decisions that actually move your business forward. This is Annie signing off. I'll see you next Monday.